Moderns and postmoderns are two different people groups. They have two different cultural frameworks, and they also have two different cultural aspirations, or sets of aspirations, based upon that framework. And the best way to describe a modern and a postmodern is to describe their contrast or their differences. I think the first one, set of differences, or pair of differences, the contrast, is the idea that moderns come from a mechanistic culture, whereas postmoderns come from a spiritually tolerant culture. And when I say spiritual, I just mean it's a diminishment upon mechanics. And when I say mechanics, I really mean atheistic, but not just in the religious sense. The modern era, which started sometime around the end of the 18th century, was best kind of described in the way that the French Revolution took place. At one point, the French were under the rule of Rome. They were under the rule of the authority of Scripture, or the revelation of God. And throughout the French Revolution, they overthrew the Pope. They also overthrew scriptural norms or scriptural presuppositions that they had, that they functioned by. The individual functioned by it. The nation functioned by it. But what's interesting is when they diminished, or when they did away with that religious context, they had to substitute another one. And what they substituted was the revelation of nature. And of course, the revelation of nature is mathematics or mechanics. During this time, there were a group of people called the encyclopedists. That's a great illustration. A group of people called the encyclopedists, who their main job was to reframe information, but not reframe it from its old religious context. So what they did was they used the alphabet as a way of organizing information. That's one of the reasons guinea pig and guillotine are close to each other in the G section in the encyclopedia. They've got nothing to do with each other, but it's a very objective, non-religious way of organizing information. To a pre-modern, this would have been absolutely inconceivable. They wouldn't have understood it. But this is one illustration of how mechanics has played itself out in the modern world, and it's something that we really don't even think twice about, the way that the encyclopedia is arranged. But the modern era lasted from about 1789 to about 1989. If you guys remember, in 1989, that was when the Berlin Wall fell. That's when Yugoslavia and Czechoslovakia and several other European countries actually started getting their independence from communism. Now, communism was the political life form of atheism. It was the engine. It wasn't the engine, but it was the vehicle whereby the entire world would be de-Christianized. And of course, to replace deity or superstition or metaphysics, they replaced that with the state. And so any child who was born after 1989, quite honestly, anyone who's born after 1989, anyone between 0 and 30 years of age, roughly, is considered postmodern because their framework is very, very different. They weren't born into an era in which there was the freedom of the West and the oppression of the East. They also did not live in a world in which they were either behind the Iron Curtain, and that was atheistic and imposed that atheistic lifestyle, very mechanistic lifestyle upon its people. And they also were not born outside, on the other side of the Iron Curtain, in which they were part of the democratic free West, so to speak, in which case the enemy was communism. And so they didn't grow up in that dichotomy. And as a result, their mindsets and their spirits just aren't formatted with that old system. So the whole spiritual orientation of the postmodern is because he looks to his modern parent and he sees the system, he sees the mechanics, he sees how following these artificial realities has curbed a lot of influence and a lot of enjoyment his parent can have. But let's be very, very clear. A postmodern is not a modern and does not have the same modern sensibilities the modern expects him to have. And that, quite honestly, is really the major problem between the two generations.